Muna Okafor tapped her fingers nervously on the armrest of her chair, her eyes flitting between the clock on the wall and the glass of wine in front of her. Tonight was supposed to be the night she finally got it right. No awkward conversations, no mismatched expectations, just a perfect evening with a charming, successful man. Dami had insisted that Sadiq Sirla was the full package. He's smart, good-looking, and from what I hear, he's looking for something serious, Dami had said over lunch a week ago. You deserve a good guy, as someone who can match your ambition. Muna had agreed, albeit reluctantly. It wasn't that she didn't want a relationship, but after a string of disastrous dates and a broken engagement, she'd grown wary of the whole process. But Dami had been persistent, and before she knew it, Muna found herself agreeing to a date with Sadiq. Now, sitting in the dimly lit restaurant, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She glanced around, taking in the elegant decor and the low hum of conversation from the other patrons. The restaurant was perfect, exactly the kind of place she would have chosen herself if she hadn't left it up to Sadiq. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of her date. Sadiq Sirla walked in with the confidence of a man who was used to being in control. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair slicked back, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Muna, he said smoothly, extending a hand as he approached the table. You look even more stunning than I imagined. Muna smiled, accepting his hand, though a small part of her bristled at the implication that he'd already formed an image of her in his mind before they'd even met. Thank you, Sadiq. It's nice to finally meet you. They exchanged the usual pleasantries, talking about their jobs, mutual acquaintances, and the city's latest happenings. But as the evening progressed, Muna noticed subtle shifts in Sadiq's demeanor. His compliments became more frequent, almost overwhelming, and his questions grew more personal, edging into territory that made her uncomfortable. By the time the main course arrived, Muna felt like she was under a microscope. Sadiq's gaze was intense, his questions probing deeper than she was willing to go on a first date. She tried to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but he seemed determined to keep the focus on her. So, Muna, Sadiq said, leaning forward slightly, what are your thoughts on commitment? Do you believe in diving in head first, or are you more cautious? Muna hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I think it depends on the situation. It's important to know someone well before making any big decisions. Sadiq nodded, but his eyes didn't waver from hers. I agree, but sometimes, you just know, don't you? When you meet the right person, it's like fate. Fate. The word sent a shiver down Muna's spine. She wasn't sure if it was the way Sadiq said it or the intensity in his eyes, but something about the conversation made her want to escape. Sensing her discomfort, Chidi, their waiter for the evening, subtly approached. He was tall, with sandy brown hair and a kind smile that made Muna feel at ease. Is everything all right here? He asked, his tone polite but laced with genuine concern. Muna looked up at him, grateful for the interruption. Yes, thank you. Everything's fine. Chidi nodded, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment, as if he could see the unease she was trying to hide. If there's anything you need, just let me know. As Chidi walked away, Muna felt a pang of regret. She wished she could just get up and leave, but that wasn't an option. She had to see this date through, no matter how uncomfortable she was. Little did she know, this night would not only mark the end of one chapter in her life but also the beginning of another, one filled with unexpected twists, a dangerous obsession, and a love that would test the boundaries of fate itself. The rest of the dinner with Sadiq dragged on in a tense silence that Muna couldn't quite shake. Every time she tried to engage in light conversation, Sadiq would steer it back toward the personal, probing for answers that she wasn't ready to give. His intensity was unnerving, and by the time dessert arrived, Muna was counting the seconds until she could politely excuse herself. As the waiter, Chidi, brought out a beautifully plated dessert, Muna couldn't help but notice the brief, almost imperceptible look of concern in his eyes as he glanced between her and Sadiq. It was as though he could sense the unease she was trying so hard to hide. "This looks wonderful," Muna said, trying to inject some cheer into her voice as she looked at the dessert. She needed to distract herself, to focus on something other than Sadiq's gaze that felt like it was boring a hole through her. Sadiq barely glanced at the dessert before turning his attention back to Muna. "You're not like most women I've met," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You're different. Special." The compliment should have flattered her, but it didn't. There was something possessive in the way he said it, something that made her skin crawl. "Thank you," Muna replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm sure you've met plenty of interesting people." Sadiq leaned in closer, his eyes darkening. "None like you. I don't think you realize just how rare you are, Muna." Muna's heart raced, and not in a good way. She needed to get out of here. She needed to escape this conversation, this entire evening. As if sensing her distress, Chidi appeared at their table once more. "Can I get you anything else? More wine, perhaps?" "No, thank you," Muna said quickly, grateful for the interruption. "Actually, I think I'm ready to call it a night." Chidi nodded, but Sadiq frowned, his expression darkening further. "So soon? We haven't even finished dessert." "I'm afraid I have an early morning tomorrow," Muna lied, keeping her tone polite but firm. "It's been a lovely evening, Sadiq, but I really should be going." Sadiq's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Muna thought he was going to argue, but then his expression softened into that charming smile again. "Of course. I'll have the check brought over." As Sadiq signaled for the check, Chidi caught Muna's eye once more, offering her a reassuring smile that made her feel, if only for a moment, that everything would be all right. After paying the bill, Sadiq escorted Muna to the front of the restaurant. The air outside was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the warmth and tension that had filled the evening. Muna took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Let me walk you to your car," Sadiq offered, his hand gently touching her elbow. Muna stiffened at the touch, but she didn't want to be rude. "That's okay. I'm parked just around the corner. I'll be fine." Sadiq's hand lingered on her elbow for a moment longer than necessary before he finally let go. "All right, but let me know when you get home safely." "I will," Muna lied again, not intending to text him after this unsettling date. As she turned to leave, Sadiq grabbed her hand, pulling her back. "Muna, wait." Startled, she looked up at him. "Yes. Promise me we'll do this again," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I feel like we're just getting to know each other." Muna hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she forced herself to nod. "Sure, we'll talk soon." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but it was the only way she could think of to end the evening without causing a scene. Sadiq finally released her hand, his gaze lingering on her as she turned and walked away. Muna's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly made her way around the corner, where she had parked. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly as she unlocked her car and slid into the driver's seat. The moment she was inside, she locked the doors and exhaled a shaky breath. What the hell just happened? She had gone on dates before that didn't work out, but this was something entirely different. Sadiq wasn't just intense, he was unsettling, in a way that made her feel like prey. She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, driving through the quiet streets of the city, her mind racing. Should she tell Dami? Would her friend believe her, or would she think Muna was just overreacting? No, Muna decided. She would tell Dami, but not tonight. Tonight, she needed to clear her head, to figure out why Sadiq had gotten under her skin in such a disturbing way. As she drove, she replayed the evening in her mind, trying to pinpoint exactly when things had started to feel wrong. It wasn't until she reached a red light that she remembered Chidi, the waiter who had seemed to sense her discomfort. There had been something comforting about him, something that had made her feel safe, if only for a moment. She had noticed him watching her throughout the evening, and it hadn't felt intrusive. Instead, it had felt like he was quietly looking out for her. Muna shook her head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. She didn't know Chidi, and it wasn't like he had done anything out of the ordinary. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about him, something different. As she pulled into the driveway of her apartment building, she resolved to push Sadiq Surla out of her mind. Tomorrow, she would focus on work and move on from this weird, unsettling evening. After all, it was just a date that went wrong, nothing more. But as she got out of her car and headed inside, Muna couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease, like a dark cloud hanging over her. And deep down, she knew that this wasn't the last she'd see of Sadiq Surla or Chidi Clark. The next morning, Muna woke up early, trying to shake off the strange vibe from the night before. She threw herself into work, hoping that the busy day ahead would help clear her mind. But as the day wore on, she found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped, half expecting to see a message from Sadiq. But her phone remained silent, and that silence only added to her unease. By lunchtime, Muna had had enough. She needed to talk to someone, and there was only one person who would understand, Dami. She called her friend and asked if they could meet for lunch at their favorite cafe. Dami, always quick to pick up on Muna's moods, agreed immediately, and within an hour, they were sitting at a small table by the window, sipping coffee. "So, how was the date?" Dami asked, a teasing smile on her lips. Muna hesitated, not sure how to start. "It was not what I expected." Dami's smile faded as she picked up on the seriousness in Muna's tone. "What happened? Did he say something rude?" Muna shook her head. "No, it's not that. He was perfectly polite, too polite, actually. It's just, there was something off about him. He was intense, almost possessive. It made me really uncomfortable." Dami frowned. "Possessive? How so?" Muna recounted the events of the previous night, including the way Sadiq had kept pushing personal questions and the unsettling way he had grabbed her hand at the end of the evening. Dami listened carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Muna, that doesn't sound right. Maybe you should block him. You don't owe him anything, especially not a second date." Muna nodded, grateful for Dami's support. "I think I will. I just needed to talk it out first." Dami reached across the table and squeezed Muna's hand. "I'm glad you told me. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't." Muna smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "Thanks. I just want to put this behind me." They continued their lunch, chatting about lighter topics to take Muna's mind off the previous night. But as they were finishing up, something caught Muna's eye. Across the cafe, sitting at a table near the door, was a familiar face, Chidi, the waiter from the restaurant. Muna's heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here? She hadn't expected to see him again, especially not so soon. As if sensing her gaze, Chidi looked up and met her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved, and Muna felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as though they were reliving the previous night all over again. But then Chidi smiled, a small, reassuring smile that made her feel at ease. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to his coffee. "Muna." Dami's voice broke through her thoughts. "You okay?" Muna blinked, realizing she had been staring. "Yeah, sorry. I just saw someone I know." Dami turned to look, but Chidi had already left the cafe, leaving Muna wondering if their encounter had been just a coincidence or something more. Over the next few days, Muna did her best to return to her normal routine. She focused on work, spent time with Dami, and tried to forget about Sadiq and the strange encounter with Chidi at the cafe. But no matter how hard she tried, the unsettling feeling from that night clung to her like a shadow. She avoided her usual social media habits, fearful of receiving a message from Sadiq. The memory of his intense gaze and controlling behavior made her wary of any online interactions. And while she hadn't blocked his number yet, she kept her phone on silent, only checking it occasionally. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Muna decided to treat herself to a quiet dinner at a small Italian bistro she loved. It was a cozy spot where she could enjoy a good meal and unwind with a glass of wine. She hadn't planned to run into anyone she knew, especially not someone who had been occupying her thoughts. As she entered the bistro, Muna was greeted by the familiar scent of garlic and herbs, the comforting ambience immediately putting her at ease. She chose a table by the window, ordered her favorite dish, and settled in with a book to distract herself. The bistro was relatively quiet that evening, with only a few other diners scattered around. Muna was beginning to relax when she heard a voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "Muna, what a surprise to see you here." She looked up and saw Sadiq standing by her table, his smile as charming as ever but with an edge that made her uneasy. He was dressed casually, but even in a simple sweater and jeans, he carried the same air of control and intensity that had unnerved her during their date. "Sadiq," Muna replied, forcing a polite smile. "I didn't expect to see you here. What can I say? I have a knack for finding the best spots in town," he said smoothly, though Muna couldn't shake the feeling that his appearance was more than just a coincidence. "Mind if I join you?" Panic flashed through her mind. She didn't want to be rude, but the last thing she wanted was to spend more time with Sadiq. "Actually, I was just about to leave," she lied, closing her book and reaching for her purse. "I've had a long day." Sadiq's smile faltered, but only for a second. "That's a shame. I was hoping we could have a proper chat this time, without the distractions of a busy restaurant." Muna's heart raced as she stood up, trying to maintain her composure. "Maybe another time. I really need to get going." Before Sadiq could respond, a voice interrupted. "Everything all right here?" Muna turned to see Chidi standing a few feet away, dressed casually but with the same calm, steady presence he had at the restaurant. His eyes flicked between Muna and Sadiq, his expression neutral but alert. For the first time since their date, Muna felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Yes, I'm fine," she said, her voice steadier than before. "I was just about to leave." Sadiq's eyes narrowed as he glanced at Chidi, clearly sizing him up. "I see. Well, I wouldn't want to keep you, Muna. But I'll be in touch." With that, Sadiq gave her one last lingering look before turning and walking out of the bistro. Muna watched him go, her breath catching in her throat as a sense of dread settled over her. Chidi stepped closer, his expression soft damning as he looked at her. "Are you sure you're okay?" He didn't seem like the kind of guy you'd want to run into. Muna nodded, but her hands were still trembling. "I'm fine. It's just complicated." Chidi's eyes searched hers for a moment before he nodded. "If you ever need to talk, or if you need anything, you know where to find me." She managed a small smile. "Thank you, Chidi. I appreciate it." Chidi hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but then he simply nodded again and walked away, leaving Muna alone with her thoughts. She left the bistro shortly after, her appetite gone, replaced by a growing sense of unease. As she walked back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that Sadiq's appearance at the bistro had been more than just a coincidence. How had he known where she would be? Was he following her? That night, as Muna lay in bed, she found herself thinking about Chidi again. His unexpected appearance had felt like a lifeline, a reminder that there were still good people in the world, people she could trust. But it also made her wonder about him. Why did he seem to show up whenever she was in trouble? Was it really just coincidence, Or was there something more going on? As sleep finally claimed her, Muna made a silent vow to find out more about both men, Sadiq and Chidi. She couldn't keep living in fear, wondering when the next unsettling encounter would happen. She needed answers, and she was determined to get them, no matter what it took. The next day, Muna woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She was done feeling like a victim in her own life. If Sadiq was going to keep showing up, she needed to be prepared. And if Chidi was going to keep appearing in her life, she needed to know more about him too. She spent the morning at work, but her thoughts were elsewhere, her mind churning with questions. During her lunch break, she decided to start her search. First, she would look into Sadiq. She didn't have much information on him, just what Dami had told her and the little he had revealed on their date, but it was a start. Muna pulled up her laptop and began typing his name into search engines and social media. It wasn't long before she found his LinkedIn profile and a few mentions of him in local business articles. Everything she read painted a picture of a successful entrepreneur, but nothing seemed to indicate the possessive, controlling side she had seen. There was one article that caught her eye, though. It was a feature about a charity gala Sadiq had hosted a year ago. The article included a photo of Sadiq with several high-profile guests, but it was a comment at the bottom of the page that drew Muna's attention. "I knew Sadiq Sirla back in college. He's always been the same, charming on the outside, dangerous on the inside. Be careful around him." The comment was anonymous, but it sent a chill down Muna's spine. Someone else had seen the side of Sadiq that she had experienced on their date. But who was this person? And why had they felt the need to warn others? Before she could dwell too much on the comment, her phone buzzed with a text from Dami. "Hey, how's your day going? Want to grab dinner tonight?" Muna hesitated before replying. She needed to talk to Dami about Sadiq, but she also wanted to find out more about Chidi. Maybe Dami could help her with that too. "Muna, dinner sounds great. Let's meet at that new Thai place." Dami, "Perfect. See you at 7. Muna put her phone away, her thoughts still swirling. She had a few hours before dinner, so she decided to do a little more digging, this time, on Chidi. But as she started searching, she realized how little she actually knew about him. She didn't know his last name, his background, or anything beyond the fact that he worked as a waiter. Frustrated, Muna leaned back in her chair. How was she supposed to find out more about him when she had so little to go on? Then it hit her. The restaurant. Maybe they had some information on him. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. That afternoon, Muna left work a bit early and headed to the restaurant where she had first met Chidi. As she walked in, she was greeted by a different waiter, who seemed surprised to see her. "Welcome back," he said, handing her a menu. "Table for one?" "Actually, I was wondering if Chidi was working today?" Muna asked, trying to sound casual. The waiter frowned. "Chidi? Sorry, we don't have anyone by that name working here." Muna's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure? Tall guy, sandy brown hair? He was working here just a few nights ago." The waiter shook his head. "I'm sure. I've been working here for years, and there's never been an Chidi." Confusion washed over Muna. How could that be? She had seen him with her own eyes, spoken to him multiple times. Was she mistaken? Or was there something else going on? "Is there anyone else I could ask?" she pressed, desperate for answers. The waiter shrugged. "You could talk to the manager, but I'm telling you, there's no Chidi here." Muna thanked him and left the restaurant, her mind racing. If Chidi wasn't a waiter at the restaurant, then who was he? And why had he been there that night? As she walked back to her car, a sense of dread settled over her. There were too many unanswered questions, too many mysteries surrounding both Sadiq and Chidi. She had thought she was beginning to unravel the truth, but now it seemed like she was more lost than ever. That evening, as she met Dami for dinner, Muna made a decision. She couldn't keep going in circles, questioning everything and everyone around her. It was time to confront the truth head-on, even if it meant facing the darkness that seemed to be closing in on her. Dinner with Dami started out light-hearted enough. They laughed over their shared love of spicy food and caught up on the latest office gossip. But beneath the surface, Muna's thoughts were still swirling with confusion and unease. Finally, after the plates had been cleared and they were sipping their drinks, Muna decided it was time to bring up what had been bothering her. "There's something I need to talk to you about," Muna began, her voice tinged with hesitation. Dami, ever perceptive, put down her glass and leaned in. "What's up?" Muna took a deep breath, then started with the easier topic, Sadiq. She recounted the strange encounter at the bistro, how Sadiq had shown up unexpectedly, and the comment she had found online warning people about him. Dami listened intently, her expression growing more concerned with each passing detail. "That's seriously creepy," Dami said when Muna finished. "It sounds like Sadiq isn't just bad news, he's a full-on red flag factory. I think you were right to trust your instincts about him." Muna nodded, feeling slightly reassured by Dami's agreement. "I know. But it gets weirder. There's this other guy, Chidi, the waiter I told you about. He's popped up a few times, always when things with Sadiq are going wrong. But when I went to the restaurant today to ask about him, they said he doesn't even work there." Dami blinked in surprise. "What? Are you sure it was the same place?" "Positive. The waiter looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about Chidi. It's like he never existed." Dami leaned back in her chair, processing what Muna had told her. "Okay, this is getting weird. It's like you're living in some kind of thriller movie." "That's what it feels like," Muna admitted. "I don't know what's real anymore, or who I can trust." Dami reached across the table and took Muna's hand, her grip firm and comforting. "Hey, you can trust me. We'll figure this out together, okay? We just need to be smart about it." Muna squeezed her hand, grateful for Dami's support. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Good thing you don't have to find out," Dami said with a smile. "But seriously, maybe we need to do some real digging. You know, hire a private investigator or something. If Sadiq is as shady as he seems, we don't want to take any chances." Muna considered the idea. It was a drastic step, but given everything that had happened, it might be the only way to get real answers. "I'll think about it. In the meantime, I'll try to stay low-key. I don't want to provoke Sadiq if he's keeping tabs on me." "Good call," Dami agreed. "And if anything happens, anything at all, you call me, day or night." They finished their drinks and said their goodbyes, but even as Muna drove home, the unease lingered. The idea of hiring a private investigator seemed like the next logical step, but it also felt like admitting just how out of control the situation had become. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Muna glanced around, half expecting to see Sadiq lurking in the shadows or Chidi watching her from a distance. But the parking lot was empty, and everything seemed normal. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That night, sleep eluded her. Every sound, every creak of the building, sent her mind racing with possibilities. Was Sadiq outside, waiting for the right moment to confront her? Was Chidi somehow involved in all of this, and if so, what did he want? Unable to sleep, Muna got up and paced the small space of her living room, her mind replaying the events of the past few days over and over again. She needed to take control of the situation, but how? Dami's suggestion of a private investigator kept nagging at her. Maybe that was the answer, someone who could dig deeper than she ever could on her own. Finally, as dawn began to break, Muna made up her mind. She would find a private investigator, someone who could look into Sadiq's past and figure out what was going on with Chidi. She couldn't do this alone anymore. The next day, Muna started her search for a PI. She found a reputable firm with good reviews and set up an appointment for later in the week. It was a small step, but it gave her a sense of control that she desperately needed. When she told Dami about the appointment, her friend was fully supportive. "Good move. Let's see what this PI can dig up. And remember, I'm here if you need anything." As the day of the meeting approached, Muna tried to keep herself busy with work and other distractions, but the tension was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Finally, the day arrived. Muna took the afternoon off from work and headed to the PI's office, her nerves on edge. The office was located in a modest building downtown, the kind of place that didn't draw much attention, which suited Muna just fine. She was greeted by a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Muna, right? I'm Detective Lara Morgan. Please, have a seat." Muna sat down, feeling a mix of anxiety and relief. She explained the situation to Lara, detailing her encounters with Sadiq and Chidi, and the strange, unexplainable events that had followed. Lara listened intently, taking notes but offering little in the way of commentary until Muna had finished. When Muna finally paused, Lara looked up from her notepad, her expression thoughtful. "You've got quite a situation here, Muna. From what you've told me, Sadiq Sirla definitely warrants a closer look. As for this Chidi character, it's unusual, to say the least, that there's no record of him at the restaurant. So, what do you think?" Muna asked, her voice tinged with hope and fear. "Am I overreacting, or is something really wrong here?" Lara leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. "I've seen enough in my line of work to know that when someone's gut tells them something's off, it usually is. I'll start with a background check on Sadiq Sirla and see what comes up. As for Chidi, I'll see if I can find any trace of him through other means, social media, employment records, whatever I can dig up." Muna nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "How long do you think it'll take?" "A few days, maybe a week," Lara replied. "I'll be thorough, but I'll also move quickly. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing, stay low, avoid contact with Sadiq, and let me know if anything else happens." With that, Muna left the office, feeling a little more in control but still haunted by the unknown. She had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but what she would find remained a terrifying mystery. Over the next several days, Muna tried to focus on her daily life, but it was impossible to shake the anxiety that had settled in her chest. Every time her phone buzzed, she felt a jolt of fear, expecting to see a message from Sadiq or some other unwanted surprise. She kept her interactions to a minimum, opting for quiet nights at home rather than venturing out, just as Lara had advised. One evening, as Muna sat in her living room, trying to read a book to distract herself, her phone rang. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. It was Lara Morgan. "Hello." Muna answered, her voice tight with anticipation. "Muna, it's Lara," the PI said, her tone professional but with an underlying seriousness that made Muna's stomach clench. "I've found some things you need to know about Sadiq Sirla." Muna swallowed hard, bracing herself. "What did you find?" Lara hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Sadiq Sirla isn't just an entrepreneur. He's connected to several incidents over the years, allegations of stalking, harassment, even a few cases where women have filed restraining orders against him. Nothing that ever led to a conviction, but enough to raise serious red flags." Muna felt her blood run cold. "So, I was right to be scared of him." "Yes, you were," Lara confirmed. "But that's not all. I looked into his current activities, and it seems he's been keeping tabs on you. He's made inquiries about your job, your friends, he even knows where you live." Muna's breath hitched. "He knows where I live." "Unfortunately, yes," Lara said, her voice softening slightly. "I don't want to alarm you, but you need to be cautious. This man is clearly fixated on you. Muna's mind raced, 1,000 thoughts and fears swirling together. What do I do, Lara? I don't want to live in fear. First, I suggest you file a report with the police. They may not be able to do much without concrete evidence of a crime, but it's important to have it on record. And consider changing your routines, maybe even staying with a friend for a while until we can figure out how to handle this. Muna nodded, even though Lara couldn't see her. I'll do that. And Chidi? Did you find anything about him? There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's the strange part. I've dug into every database, every record I could access, and there's no trace of anyone named Chidi matching the description you gave. No employment history, no social media presence, nothing. It's like he doesn't exist. Muna's heart sank. How is that possible? I talked to him. Dami saw him, he's real. He has to be. I believe you, Muna, Lara said calmly. But the fact that I can't find anything on him is worrying. It could mean a few things. Maybe he's using a fake name, or maybe he's very good at covering his tracks. Either way, it's suspicious. Muna tried to process this information, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. So, what do I do? If I can't even figure out who Chidi is, how do I know if I can trust him? Lara's voice softened, offering what little reassurance she could. For now, I'd advise you to keep your distance from anyone you're not sure about. If Chidi contacts you, be cautious, don't engage unless you absolutely have to. And if you see him again, let me know immediately. Muna nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. Okay. I'll be careful. Good, Lara replied. I'll keep digging, and I'll be in touch if I find anything else. In the meantime, take care of yourself, Muna. This is a lot to deal with, but you're not alone in this. They said their goodbyes, and Muna hung up the phone, her mind reeling from everything Lara had told her. Sadiq's unsettling history, the fact that he knew where she lived, and now the mystery of Chidi's true identity, it was all too much to handle. She felt trapped, like a deer in headlights, unsure of which way to turn. For a moment, she considered calling Dami and asking to stay at her place for a few days, but she didn't want to drag her friend further into this mess. Dami had been nothing but supportive, but Muna didn't want to put her in danger, especially with Sadiq's unpredictable behavior. Instead, Muna decided to spend the night at a hotel. She quickly packed a small bag with essentials, grabbed her keys, and left her apartment. The idea of sleeping somewhere unfamiliar wasn't comforting, but it was better than staying in her apartment, where Sadiq could easily find her. As she drove to the hotel, Muna's thoughts kept returning to Chidi. She replayed every conversation they'd had, every interaction, trying to spot any red flags she might have missed. But nothing about him had ever seemed threatening. If anything, he had always appeared kind and protective. But now, with Lara's warning ringing in her ears, Muna couldn't ignore the possibility that Chidi was hiding something important. The fact that there was no trace of him anywhere only deepened her sense of unease. After checking into the hotel and locking herself in her room, Muna sat on the bed, her phone in her hand. She considered texting Dami, but she knew her friend would only worry. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts until she found Chidi's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she even say if he picked up? Should she confront him, demand to know who he really was? Or should she wait and see if Lara could uncover anything more about him? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. Her heart leaped into her throat when she saw it was from Sadiq. Sadiqi, I'm worried about you, Muna. You've been distant. Let's talk. Muna's hands trembled as she stared at the message. The calm, seemingly caring tone of his text only made her more uneasy. She knew better now. This wasn't concern, it was control. She quickly blocked his number, a small but necessary step to protect herself. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. Sadiq was resourceful, and if he was truly obsessed with her, he would find other ways to get to her. After blocking Sadiq, she forced herself to focus. She couldn't keep reacting out of fear. She needed to be proactive, to regain control of her life. Tomorrow, she would file the police report, as Lara suggested. It might not stop Sadiq, but it would create a paper trail, something to protect her if things escalated.